Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another edition of AV&R and the Connected Supply Chain. Today, our topic of interest is going to be OS migration and the interface ease of use. And we're going to spend a little time talking about what that means exactly. Today, we have back by popular demand our Principal Solutions Architect, Mr. Mark Stager. Welcome back, Mark.
Hello, everyone.
How's it going today?
It is going terrific.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for taking time again today. Today, there's been a lot of information or a lot of activity around the migration of operating systems on our mobile devices from the traditional Windows Mobile that lived in our barcode world over to new OSs or different operating systems. So we want to spend a little time talking about that today. So the rugged mobile device space it's been in transition for a long time, since the release of Windows CE, Pocket PC in 2000, and for the last 18 years, virtually every rugged mobile computer user has had software that worked under that environment. There is right now what's happening is the end of service or the end of the life of Windows Mobile in 2020. So could you talk a little bit about some of the details on that and how that impacts our devices and our industry?
Sure, Gary. I've been doing this for a real long time, and I remember the first Windows CE device, and it was 18 years ago, and in some way, shape, or form, every application that has been compiled in that original OS, even with maybe minor updates, could run on a Windows mobile device today. So all those applications that are out there, and there's a ton of them, folks using them are now going to be kind of at risk. Now, what does that mean? It doesn't mean that, if you have a Windows mobile device and, the common variations of this are Pocket PC, Windows Mobile 2005, there's a whole bunch of others, Windows Compact Edition 6.5, Windows Embedded Edition 6.5, Windows CE 6, Windows CE 7, I could go on and on and on. All of those operating systems are being end of life. And starting off, the one thing to keep in mind is that the applications on those devices aren't going to stop working. They're going to continue working. But the caveat is Microsoft is no longer going to support those, which means that if some hacker had it in his mind to say, hey, I'm going to try to impact the enterprise by creating a virus or a hack on these devices that are no longer supported by Microsoft, Microsoft doesn't have to do anything about it. So it puts an enterprise at risk for intrusion. So some examples, Windows CE 5.0, that one's already gone. Microsoft ended support for that in October of 2014. Windows Embedded Compact Edition is the one that is the version 7 of it is actually going to be the longest lived version, and that's going to go until April of 2021. The lion's share of these devices, though, are Windows Embedded Handheld 6.5, or also known as Windows Mobile 6.5, and that is actually ending in January of 2020.
Wow. I've been around doing this probably as long as you, and I'm trying to think of the numbers are staggering on how many devices out there are running these operating systems. So as we talk about the support ending, and depending on what operating system, my device already might have ended based on what you just said to me. Do I need to upgrade? Because I talk to people and I've got existing applications. I mean, they probably won't stop working, but what kind of things do I need to consider for this movement?
Well, like I said earlier, the security and hackers is a huge one. An enterprise security IT department would generally not allow an unsupported device on the network anymore. And all these devices typically are on the network. Even if they don't have access to the internet, there's still ways that hackers can gain access by getting into a device that's enrolled on the network. So that's the big risk. Other considerations too, for example, these are all old technology devices. So, when you look at back in the day, a computer that is 5 to 7 years old is not as powerful as a modern smartphone. It's amazing how much technology has changed over the last few years. So for example, an old device, if you wanted to load 100,000 records in a database, it would take hours. I had one customer that would load they had millions of records that they were loading on an SD card on a a Zebra mobile device, and they would let it run all night long. It would take that long to load those records into that device. And today, a modern smartphone or a modern Android OS, rugged handheld with Android OS on it, would load those same records in seconds. So there's a lot of efficiencies that can be gained from this. And then another issue with the Windows Embedded Handheld and Windows Mobile is this stylus. The stylus was a bad idea. I stopped using it. I stopped designing applications around the use of a stylus a long time ago. When you're looking at a warehouse worker, they don't want to take the extra time it takes to move the stylus out of that device and start writing on the screen with it. So they'll typically use their finger, and that's what Apple and Android's done for us. They've kind of got us all used to using our finger to manipulate devices, which is a much better idea.
Okay, so you win. You talked me into it. I'm ready to upgrade. So now that I'm thinking about this move, what do I have to think about? And I don't even know what do I need to upgrade to that's out there. So I know that we're talking about OS, so it's software, but could you kind of dig a little bit more into, ways to kind of organize my mind on how I need to make that move?
So if you have one of these devices in your company today, it's running some kind of software. And I'll kind of briefly describe each of the different types that are commonly used. So the first one that we run into an awful lot is terminal emulation. A long time ago, and I'm not going to say in a galaxy far, far away, that might just actually be a patent somewhere, or I get in trouble with Lucasfilm for that one. But anyway, there were green screen systems, and a lot of developers decided that, hey, we can mobilize these green screen systems by buying a mobile device and kind of just using them as a keyboard and a screen. So that the processor isn't really even used. It's just kind of emulating, and that's the term, terminal emulation. It's emulating a host system. So on a terminal emulation device, it's a dumb device that's used over Wi-Fi. So if we say, for example, want to replace our Windows Mobile embedded handheld 6.5 devices with a modern rugged Android device from Zebra Technologies or Honeywell, then you would basically have to also obtain the terminal emulation software that go along with it. And generally, the software will just run because the new device is effectively just replacing the old device. There are some considerations, though. Keyboards and function keys. A lot of the new devices don't even have keyboards because Android really is optimized to be used with screen input. Function keys, that's another huge one. A lot of the applications that are in play today use function keys for navigation, like F2 for next and F3 for previous, or you've seen those types of applications. So when you're looking at a device, make sure that either A, you can redesign it and optimize it so that you can use an on-screen device with a terminal emulation application. There's vendors out there that allow that. There's a company called Avanti who has a product called Velocity that will let you capture that screen and put on-screen buttons and on-screen drop-downs. It can really, the term is modernize an old application. So you can take a new device that's kind of more designed for the mobile worker as they are today and take an old application and make it look like it was brand new without doing any programming. So that's an exciting technology.
So TE was, kind of the simple way for deploying Windows mobile devices in the past, right? So are there some other options we have available instead of just a terminal emulation? Is there stuff that we can write on the device, or what's our other options?
So another commonly used application development methodology on these mobile devices was just a plain old website. A website is a website, right? If it works on a Windows mobile device, I can guarantee you it'll work fine on an Android device. The inverse is not true. The browsers in the old devices do not support the current HTML5 and JavaScript stuff that happens, but an Android browser is perfectly capable of doing that. So any browser application that would have worked before will certainly work now under the new devices. There's also considerations there. Maybe your old application isn't modernized, just like I'd mentioned with the terminal emulation. Maybe it's not, it doesn't have the right screen resolution for a new device, or it's really kind of clunky because it was used to using the old technology. So there might be some updates you want to do there as well. And web apps can be modernized also with the Velocity product, or by adding what they call modern responsive design. In developer terms, that means a website that's aware that it's on a mobile device and is aware of the screen size and aligns itself to adapt to that. So the other type of application that we run into is Microsoft called it a smart client, and that is an actual client that is compiled and runs on the device. And these are in place for disconnected applications where you don't have access to the Wi-Fi, or you want to download data, affect it, and then upload it again. So these are compiled applications, and this is the toughest one. This is a rewrite from scratch. Even if you did if there was such a thing as a Windows 10 Microsoft rugged mobile device, you would still have to rewrite the application because the Windows Embedded Handheld is not compatible with Windows as it is today. So it's a do-over no matter what you do. And like I said before, these new devices are powerhouses. They have as much power. A modern phone or a rugged device today with an Android OS is just as powerful as a computer was 5 to 8 years ago, depending on the computer. So there's a lot of new technology and new features that you can enable your mobile workers today that you couldn't do back then. So rewrite isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah. So what other considerations as you think about, that rewrite smart device piece? Is there other considerations we have to be concerned about?
Absolutely. Sending and receiving data as an example. Android doesn't support direct connections to Microsoft SQL easily. So if your applications did that, you have to re-architect that. There are drivers that will allow you to consume SQL, but it's not inherent in Android Studio. So you'd have to go to a third-party technology for that. Also, a lot of applications were developed using SOAP, and that's a term for Microsoft. It refers to an XML web service. Android, again, does not consume SOAP web services inherently. The SOAP web service would either have to be changed to be a more modern REST-based JSON web service, or again, you'd have to get a third-party control to use an old web service. So there's just considerations, especially when you're dealing with data.
So it sounds way too complicated, and I could make this really easy for everybody. So I have my smartphone. I go to the web. I could just go to an web application, and I could do anything from there. So why can't we just use a web application and go through all that trouble that you mentioned above from rewriting from scratch?
We could. Personally, I don't think it really depends on the use case and the requirements, but it's not always a good idea to use a web application. So first of all, if you're partially disconnected or if your Wi-Fi isn't complete, that's a deal breaker. Then the web application just falls apart. There are other considerations. The browser adds a layer of complexity between the hardware and the user interface. So your screens draw slower. Say you're trying to scan 100 barcodes in 20 seconds. It's physically possible with a smart client or app that's running on the device. It may not be possible through a website because it has to go up and post and come back. Slower scrolling. You've got some of these, your users might be picky about how responsive the application is. OS updates can wreak havoc with your application because the WebKit, which is a term that's basically pieces of the web browser that are built right into the OS, sometimes gets updated when the OS gets updated and can break the application. Really, if you got to go this route, the best approach is to get an enterprise browser, so at least you have control of the hardware layer that controls the barcode and RFID scanner. An enterprise browser would allow a web developer direct access to that hardware so that the browser being in the middle doesn't take as much of a toll on you. And as an example of that, say you want to write an application where you scan a barcode, but then you want to turn off the scanner when the user has to enter a quantity. Otherwise, you might end up with a user that's not paying attention, that scans 2 barcodes, and you might end up with 14,785,000 of something, when really it's the next UPC or the next barcode they are scanned. So if you can disable that, you can prevent that from happening. And in a web browser, typically you can't, but with a software like the enterprise browser, the website can tell the scanner to shut off. That way the user doesn't make those mistakes.
Gotcha. Well, okay, so you talked me out of the easy way out of it, so thanks for explaining that. As we look at moving to Android and the different functionality, what else is different in terms of the Android operating system?
Well, Android is a much better option for a worker, and a new device with a faster processor and more memory is really just adds to that. But it comes at a price. Android is the most dominant OS in the world, surpassing even Windows in 2017. This makes it a hacker target. So inherently, it's technically more secure than Windows Mobile ever was. So less of a threat than Windows Mobile in terms of its way it's architected. But because of the hacker threat and everybody's looking at it and trying to gain access to those devices, care must be taken when you're deploying it.
Gotcha. So there is a lot to think about. So my mind's turning right now on all the other things that could happen in terms of rolling out a completely new change to a system and actually moving from something that was proven for years and years in our industry to something like an Android. So what other things am I missing that I should consider when deploying an Android application?
Well, make sure the vendor that you pick, the hardware vendor, will supply patches, and make sure that you have an MDM or mobile device management software to be able to deploy those patches easily. For example, Zebra has a service called Lifeguard that, as long as you have a service contract on the device, they'll do updates way past the end of life on the device. So instead of getting like on a consumer device like a Samsung phone, you may only get 2 to 3 years of patches. We can get up to 7 years on a rugged enterprise handheld device using Lifeguard, and there are other vendors doing similar things. Also, most vendors supply both two versions of these Android devices. One with the Google Play Store installed, that's also kind of known as GMS or Google Mobile Services, and then a plain Jane Android version which has no Google. So, this device doesn't have a Play Store. There's no way for a user to log in and download an app that could be suspicious. It's basically a walled garden, other than it does have access to the internet unless you stop that. I would say definitely consider the plain Android without the Google, unless you have functionality like you want mapping or there's some other Google functionality that you want. Also, lock down the device with your MDM. MDM such as SODI, MobiControl, or AirWatch, and there are other tools that allow an administrator to say, hey, Mr. User, you only have access to these 4 apps. And the device comes on and the 4 apps are displayed and they can't do anything else. They can't hit Wi-Fi settings, they can't hit email, or if email is something that you want to have happen on the device, the administrator can log into the MDM and grant that access. So definitely when you're doing Android, consider locking it down with an MDM or another tool. Also, obtain it from a vendor that is aware of the product lifecycle and try to purchase early on. Now, what does that mean? So any device has a beginning, a middle, and an end of sale, right? So the closer you can get to the beginning of sale of a device, the more years you're going to be able to get out of it, the more years of patches. And just like I said before, even with Windows Mobile, these devices aren't going to stop working. But when the vendor stops supplying patches for it, then you are again at risk, just like Windows Mobile is at risk.
Gotcha. Those are some great considerations and a lot of stuff to worry about when you're picking the right vendor. It's very important. So I have one more question for you. As we look at, the wide area network devices that are out there on a cellular carrier, we've had a lot of clients over the years and partners over the years that we've deployed direct store delivery, route sales, pretty much any device that's outside of the 4 walls that are running Windows Mobile. Can you speak to that a little bit, how that's impacted?
Each of the major carriers in the United States have their own what they call sunset dates for certain wireless technologies. So let me say this in the beginning. LTE, as most of you are aware, or hopefully all of you, is the current technology that the cellular carriers rely on in order to bring data and voice to the devices. There are no Windows Mobile devices that have ever been made, to my knowledge, that have LTE in them. They all have technology that was previous to LTE. So, like, for example, AT&T sunset their 2G networks in 2016. In 2017, Verizon is no longer certifying their 3G network devices. So we're kind of looking at the first one that's going to be a problem is Verizon. At the end of 2019, they've already stated that they're going to basically discontinue the towers of all their 3G devices, and 2G might be at risk as well. So what that means to everybody that has these devices that are using them for field service or package delivery or whatever the application is, that, remember I said before, your device won't stop working? Well, in this case, it will stop working. It will stop working to the point where you won't be able to send your data back. Obviously, the app will still work, and if you wanted to, you could drive it back to a cradle and sync it, or you could buy a Wi-Fi hotspot, but still, there's an incredible amount of risk there. So if we look past that 2019 date, it looks like T-Mobile is going to kill their 2G and 3G around about the end of 2020. And then finally, Sprint and AT&T are going to kill their 3G networks at about 2021. And the reason they're doing this, they're not trying to make you upgrade or buy a new device and by any stretch of the imagination. There are new technologies coming out like 5G, and they want to use that same airspace that 3G and 2G are currently occupying to enable these new 5G features. Again, faster, smarter, better connectivity is only to be had with technology advancement, and there's only a limited amount of airspace that we can use for these things. So they want to reutilize that with these 5G networks.
Well, there is so much to think about, and no wonder there's been so much activity around this topic of OS migration. So thank you very much, Mark, for your deep dive, and I hope that any of our listeners out there really gain a lot from some of the tidbits that you've shared. I'm always enlightened by our conversations, and thanks again for being part of our event.
Thank you very much, Gary. Happy to help.
Have a great day.
Bye now.
Bye now.